The season is almost here, which means it's time to start tweaking those dynasty rosters and pushing towards that contender status. If you're a mid-table team, we're going to walk you through 4 veteran players you should be looking to buy in your dynasty leagues right now. Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. That is right. I'm joined by the fantastic Addison Hayes. We are going to be walking through 4 veteran players you should be buying in your dynasty leagues to help you contend this year. Addison, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Rich. Thank you so much for asking me to come on. I'm super excited to talk about some of these players here.
No, it's fantastic. So I set Addison some homework. He had to come up with 4 veterans that he's looking to buy. And we're going to walk through each of them right now. But first up, we've got Christian Kirk. Had an interesting sort of career. Took a little bit of time getting going, I think it's fair to say, in Arizona. Finally started to find his feet. And then, obviously, the monster contract that Jacksonville threw his way. Had a fantastic 2022 season. Finishes the wide receiver 12 overall. Despite the fact he only had, I say only, a 20.7% target share. A challenging year last year. I think Trevor Lawrence perhaps didn't have the greatest year. Obviously, Calvin Ridley was brought in, but you really like him as a potential buy for 2024. So why is that, Addison?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons why I think Christian Kirk is a really good buy this year. Number one, I think the price is fantastic. I mean, if you look, you got it on the screen there, wide receiver 41 in DLF ADP. I mean, for the past 2 years, he's outperformed that ADP. And I get maybe some of the age is baked into that because of Dynasty and whatnot. And maybe there's not a whole ton of upside because Christian Kirk just kind of is who he is at this point. But at that ADP, if you can snag him for, a second round pick to be the wide receiver 4 on your team that you end up playing in your flex spot every single week or in your wide receiver 3 spot every week just because he's that consistent guy, I think that's a great reason. Not to mention the fact that I think that he's in for a bounce back year, kind of back to where he was in 2022 because Calvin Ridley's no longer there. Brian Thomas comes in. I'm super high on Brian Thomas, but, he is still a rookie. He only broke out once in college, so there might be some growing pains or something along those lines for BTJ to where if Christian Kirk can kind of reclaim that wide receiver 1 spot on the team, at least in terms of total targets, I think that he's going to be a very, very productive player. And he was a wide receiver 1 on the team last year. He was out targeting Calvin Ridley. He was out targeting Evan Ingram up until the week that he got hurt. And then Evan Ingram took off. Ridley did really well without Kirk as well. So I think, Kirk's kind of here to stay, I think, in Jacksonville. And I think he offers a really, really good buy low price point for a contending team looking for some extra production.
Yeah, I love these players that kind of aren't old, but people are already putting them on the scrap heap because they're not the shiny new thing. And I think we sort of have this kind of wave of dynasty value. And once you start to get sort of year 6, year 7 for those wide receivers, the price starts to fall, the price starts to drop, but the production's not quite dropping yet. And I think those sort of profile of players generally represent fantastic guys to go out and buy. I think I really like your points around kind of the change in targets. Do you have any concern? They've obviously spent a high draft pick on Brian Thomas Jr. They've gone out and paid Gabe Davis. They've got Evan Ingram, who they've extended last year. Are you concerned that there could just be kind of too many mouths to feed and there's not enough volume potentially for Christian Kirk to kind of get up to where we could potentially hope in terms of those wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 numbers?
Not really. No, I like I said, like he was already out targeting Calvin Ridley last year. And if we assume that Brian Thomas Jr. comes in and is Calvin Ridley, I mean, that's 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns right there on 130 targets. And Kirk was out targeting him. Evan Ingram is great, but I think that Kirk operates kind of the same part of the field as Ingram. And Lawrence, I think, prefers Christian Kirk over Ingram, as we've seen over the course of, roughly like 30 games, essentially from 2022 up until when he got hurt last year. Gabe Davis I think he's fun. I think he's, but like he's going to replace the Zay Jones or Marvin Jones. He's going to be like a deep threat. He just kind of is what he is and is not the same kind of wide receiver that Christian Kirk is. So while I do understand that there are still a lot of mouths to feed, there's a lot of really good players there. I still think that Christian Kirk is at the top of the list, at least in terms of security for Trevor Lawrence and experience as well. Like it's just, it feels like, and I know like when you said that these guys, these wide receivers that enter like year 6, year 7, and they just kind of are what they are at this point, and their price drops because of that, because they're not really sexy. Like it feels like Cleveland Browns Jarvis Landry, who was still with OBJ and all the other, David Njoku was there. It was a run first offense with Nick Chubb too, but like that's just what it feels like. Like Kirk is safe, secure, consistent, and maybe if he has good touchdown weeks, and then he's going to get you up near 18 to 20 or more fantasy points, and that's could help just win you a week.
Yeah, he feels a bit like 2019, 2020, 2021 kind of Tyler Boyd-esque. You don't love, but you look at him at the end of the year and he's put up wide receiver 2 numbers, and you're like, oh, I never loved starting him any week, but actually he never burned me and he put up really decent season long numbers. So I really like that kind of comparison. I think the one concern I have, I guess, is I think Gabe Davis has been brought in to be that kind of sacrificial X that seems to be the modern phrase of he's going to be line up on the line of scrimmage. He's going to take the press coverage. He's going to run deep. He's going to get involved in the run game because we know he's a good blocker. Now, is Brian Thomas going to stay on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, or is it going to be Christian Kirk? And that's certainly something I'm going to be watching at the beginning of the season. He's looking at those snap codes and saying, if Christian Kirk's coming off the field in 2 wide receiver sets, I'm a little bit concerned that could potentially cap just that ceiling. I still think he can absolutely hit the floor. And at the price he is, I still think he's a good bet, even if he is only playing in 3 wide receiver sets. But I just think that kind of going from a 90% snap share guy to potentially like a 70% snap share guy could just take that little kind of cherry off the top, shall we say, in terms of his potential profile this year. So certainly in the preseason, when the offense is on the field, the first team, we might only see a drive or 2. I'm going to be looking to see how much Christian Kirk's down on the field. And certainly those first 1, 2, 3 weeks, I think could be key. But, we go back and forth about Christian Kirk all day. However we talk about it, the value right now is ridiculous. Wide receiver 41, an early second round pick potentially in terms of the value that he's going in real leagues, in real trades that I'm seeing. And I think his floor feels like a wide receiver 3 this year, with the ceiling of potentially being a wide receiver 2. So absolutely love the suggestion. I think it's a fantastic first guy to kick us off with. Before we move on to Addison's second guy, though, we are closing in on 3,000 subscribers. The aim is 3,000 by the kickoff when we get to September. When we hit that, Tom and I, we've got a fantastic giveaway. We're giving away £100 in cold hard cash. We're giving away 12-month membership of our premium golden deck chair tier, and then we are giving away a 25 voucher to our Fantasy Sanctuary merch store for whatever you want. So if you want to get involved in that, drop a comment below. Every single comment will get you 1 entry. The more comments, the more entries when we hit that 3,000 number. The next guy we're talking about, though, Addison, I feel like we're going to disagree here. So let's just dive into it. Jake Ferguson, what is it about him that you're looking to go out and acquire?
Well, can I flip it back on you? Why do you think that we're going to disagree on this?
Because I think for me, he just feels like a ham and egger. Like he is what I would class that kind of volume-based RB2 type player that, he's never great. He's never amazing, but just because he gets volume, you kind of feel like you have to put him in your lineup. And I feel like that's Jake Ferguson, but in tight end form. Like, I don't think Jake Ferguson is ever giving you a positional advantage at the tight end position. I think if he catches a touchdown and if he gets the potential volume that we're hoping to see, he can give you replacement level production. But for me, at tight end 12 costs, I would rather go out and pay up for one of the top 7 tight ends, or tear down to, someone like a Tyler Conklin or something like that I think will give you potentially similar production for half the price.
So that I don't disagree with. That if you're really just looking for a difference-making tight end, Jake Ferguson is probably not the player for you. Like, I would rather go and pay more for Kyle Pitts or Dalton Kincaid or Mark Andrews or somebody like that, because those guys can and will probably be difference makers at the tight end position in terms of like they have the ability to finish as the tight end 1 overall. Jake Ferguson, I will admit, does not have that ability, at least not from what I'm looking at. And but even despite all of that, I still am in on Jake Ferguson because I think, again, the motto of the video today, at least for the 4 players that I picked, is we're looking for value players that are going to outperform their price points and are going to be essentially essential to getting more production out of players than what you paid for them, especially as a contender. And those are the kind of the moves that I like to make in Dynasty, where I don't want to go out and I don't want to overpay for somebody that is, maybe a massive producer, but I like to make those smaller moves, hold on to those first round picks. I covet those a little bit more. So that's what I think I'm going for in this video. And Jake Ferguson fits that. I mean, he was one of 7 tight ends last year with over 100 targets. I don't know how that doesn't replicate again this year when you've lost Michael Gallup, whatever he was, but he retired for some reason, but that was kind of a shock. But so Michael Gallup's no longer on the team. It is CeeDee Lamb, who's obviously amazing, Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson. They do not have Tony Pollard anymore, and they brought back 30-year-old Zeke, or however old he is. He probably is still like 26 because he came in the league at 18 years old or whatever. Rico Dowdle, but like there is no real run game or real run threat, I think, to where I'm looking at this Cowboys team and I'm like, how does Dak Prescott not throw for nearly 700 pass attempts this year? And if he does that, how does Jake Ferguson not soak up? He had 102 targets last year. I don't know how maybe he doesn't get up over 110, over 115. Like if he gets close to 120, that's what Travis Kelce had last year. That's what TJ Hockenson had last year. That's what David Njoku had, Sam Laporta. They all were plus or minus like 3 targets around the 120 mark. And if, Jake Ferguson gets to that point, yes, he's not uber athletic. No, he's not a super sexy player, but it's just like, yeah, he just seems, again, so consistent, so safe. A guy that if you don't have one of the elite options or don't have the ability to go trade for one of those, who's the next guy to go after? To me, it's Jake Ferguson rather than Cole Kmet or Dalton Schultz or Pat Freiermuth or Dallas Goedert. It's Jake Ferguson for me.
Yeah, and I guess this comes back to kind of how you're approaching it, isn't it? For me, I guess I don't like this tier of tight end, quite frankly. So I'm just kind of trying to opt out of it at all. I completely get what you're saying in terms of, every time I look at this Cowboys offense and try to kind of project basically the entire offense, I have no idea because I'm like, I know Dak's probably going to have between 650 and 700 passing attempts this year. I have no idea where those targets are going. I literally don't. The answer is maybe just it comes back to
will go to CeeDee Lamb, and
maybe that's it. Maybe we see CeeDee Lamb like 200 plus. Maybe he just breaks every kind of target record and reception record this year, and maybe that is the answer. But and I can kind of see the volume play. I just think sometimes and maybe I'm overthinking this too much, is that I don't like relying on situation and volume over talent in these situations. And I think, I can get everything you're saying. And I do think at the cost to acquire in a trade, he's a decent level. If you're super painful, you got no answer at tight end, you are hurting bad, going out and sending a second round pick for Jake Ferguson, that feels palatable. I guess where I'm struggling is that tight end 12 value, and that's probably more of a startup question than a kind of a trade question, if that makes sense.
Right. No, yeah, that probably is. It's the ADP and startup is not always super indicative of trade value, especially because in startups you could be valuing youth a little bit more, whereas, in actual trades, you have a productive contending roster. You want to go out and you value these guys a little bit more, like you value Jake Ferguson slightly more. In a trade sense, that you'd be willing to send, a 25 second and third round pick for Jake Ferguson rather than send a 25 first for, George Kittle or Kyle Pitts or something like that. Like that, those are the moves and those are the differences, I think, in cost that make Jake Ferguson so enticing to me. Is that I think that he has the opportunity to be a top 5 fantasy tight end this year because of the volume that I think that he's going to get. Like Evan Ingram had 140 targets last year and was the tight end 2, kind of came out of nowhere. I would probably rather have Jake Ferguson than Evan Ingram going into 2024. Like from a redraft standpoint, I think I would rather have Ferguson than Ingram because there are, like, it kind of goes back to Christian Kirk. There's more mouths to feed in Jacksonville than I think that there are in Dallas. Not to mention that Dak is a better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence, and I think Ferguson's just a better part of their, or more integrated part of their offense moving forward than what we saw last year.
Yeah, so I've got a, I guess, slightly theoretical question for you here. I guess it probably leans into how you approach things, how you play Dynasty. Is would you rather, if you've got, so you don't roster any tight ends in this situation, you're absolutely desperate at tight end, but you're a contender that think you can win title this year. You've only got a second round pick to play with in terms of value. So that's your only trade chip that you can send out. I appreciate this is quite hypothetical. Would you rather go and spend that second round pick to go and get Jake Ferguson? Or would you rather spend that second round pick to go and take, let's say, 3 flyers on, I don't know, Tucker Kraft, Michael Mayer, Greg Dulcich, let's say. So you can go Jake Ferguson or take 3 flyers, which I think would you agree that's probably about right in value, those 3 for Jake Ferguson?
Maybe not those 3 specifically, but I understand the conceptual idea of, would you rather have 3 dart throw tight ends that are tight end 20 to 30 or 1 Jake Ferguson? I still go for Jake Ferguson, but I understand the conceptual idea of the quantity over quality at this point, because Ferguson does bridge, he kind of rides that borderline between quality and same as everybody else, But I think that Ferguson is closer to the quality tier than he is the everybody else tier, so to speak. So, and we've seen so many tight ends. We've been so hopeful about so many other tight ends that are in that range. Like Tucker Kraft was nothing until Luke Musgrave got hurt. Michael Mayer is a tight end 2. Greg Dulcich flashed for like 4 games and then has been hurt all last year and hasn't really done all that much. New offense, rookie quarterback. And I could say the same thing for, Chigo Okonkwo is buried on target share now. You could say the same about Mike Gesicki, might be an interesting name now in Cincinnati. And if T. Higgins continues to get hurt, could he be the number 2 option there behind Jamar Chase with his background of being an elite athletic tight end? I don't know, but we've seen Mike Gesicki also not do well for the past couple of years. There's so many there's all these arguments. That's why those tight ends are down that far, no matter who you pick and choose to be your kind of guy. I'd rather just eliminate, I think, a lot of that. I don't want to say risk because there's not much risk in investing in tight ends that low, but just like the unknown factors. And I'd rather just go for a guy that I just watched him have 100 targets last year, and I think he's probably in line for at least that, if not more. And I know that he was a top 10 tight end last year on that volume. So if he gets more, could he get closer to top 5? That's kind of where I would look at with Ferguson.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, when you say there's not much risk in those tight ends lower down, I guess the risk is in this scenario, you don't find an answer at tight end, and none of them are startable. None of them have bankable volume, and you basically have a 0 at the tight end position week in, week out, which doesn't give you an answer. So yeah, I completely get it. And I appreciate you for playing along with my very hypothetical and slightly strained question.
No,
however, we're going to definitely agree on this next guy. So Rhamondre Stevenson, there's sometimes I just look at the Dynasty market and I'm like, what's going on? Why is this guy valued where he is? Rhamondre Stevenson was an absolute stud in 2022, had a phenomenal season, finished as the RB9, but I think that probably undersells how good a season he had. We have a down year in which the Patriots were just horrendous in every single facet of the game. And all of a sudden, his price has plummeted, and you can kind of get him for a single second and a 3rd round pick. Like it seems ridiculous. Why is he one of the players that you're targeting right now?
It's again another price point argument where up until I think the contract kind of woke people back up to Rhamondre. It was like a slow day in late July. Training camps haven't started, and all of a sudden you get a notification. Rhamondre Stevenson just signed like a 3-year, $40 million or whatever. Well, I don't remember what the actual, but it was like a 3 or 4 year deal for Rhamondre, and it was just like, oh wow, like he's the RB1 for New England still and is going to be for the next couple of years. So for Dynasty, that makes him a little bit more interesting. So I think his price is climbing back up. But, I mean, yeah, you look at what he did in 2022. He had, I think, almost 90 targets that year. The only thing that really held him back was he didn't really score all that much. And that was just the product of the horrible New England Patriots offense. But he was actually kind of basically doing the same thing last year up until he got hurt. And then Ezekiel Elliott took over. Like, Zeke was a non-factor when Rhamondre was healthy. Rhamondre was doing the exact same thing that he was doing in 2022 with Damian Harris. And so because he's been doing it basically for 2 years in a row now when healthy, I have no reason to believe that anything's going to change for 2024 except possibly get better, because now there is a shot that the offense might actually be somewhat decent. I'm not going to say it's good. I'm not going to say they're going to have a breakout with their new rookie like the Texans had. But, Drake May inspires more confidence into this offense and predicting its ability to score touchdowns. You add in Jalen Polk. Javon Baker has been making waves in training camp. And Rhamondre Stevenson, you signed KJ Osborne as well, too, which I think is an underrated signing, at least for wide receiver stability. And Rhamondre Stevenson, like, you lose Zeke, you add Antonio Gibson. Feels like a wash maybe in terms of backup running back opportunities. But I think Rhamondre is in line for, again, another 250 to 300 touches. And if a good chunk of that is receiving volume like we've seen for the past 2 years, I mean, it almost seems like he could just easily be a top 15, top 12 fantasy running back this year. And you're getting him for like mid RB2 to back end RB2 prices. Like, he's just the same as all these other guys over here, but he's just not as sexy of a name.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I agree with everything you said, but to build on that, you mentioned the contract at the top. We're looking in Dynasty, for me, for a player that's going to be a nailed-on starter for 2 seasons. That's basically all I can kind of really hope for and expect is a 2-season window at running back position. Well, Rhamondre Stevenson's cap hit in 2025 is going to be 5.6 million with a 6 million dead cap hit. So the Patriots aren't going to save any money moving on from him before next season. So he's going to be the starting running back in New England for 2024 and 2025. If you go and look at the contract situations and the situations of the top 24 running backs, there's a surprisingly few number of players you can say, yeah, they're the nailed on starter for 2 years. Like, that has unbelievable value. And yeah, you can add into that, he's a big body back. He is a target hog. I think we can keep talking about, these sexy kind of quicker lightning type backs, Jamar Gibbs and Devon Achan and stuff like that. Rhamondre Stevenson is a target hog to the levels of anyone not named kind of Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall. And that's where the value comes from in the running back position. So I think that Rhamondre Stevenson is a massive value right now. I love the cost to acquire. I love that, Jacoby Brissett is not a player that is scared to check down. You look at 56% of his dropbacks last year, when he was with the Cleveland Browns and starting that year, 56% of his dropbacks went less than 10 yards downfield. Like, this guy loves a check down and loves getting the running backs involved. And that's in Cleveland, where he was checking down to Nick Chubb, who is not a noted pass catcher, and Kareem Hunt and guys like that. I think that you give him Rhamondre Stevenson, who we know he's good on checkdowns. We know can work in the screen game and is an underrated route runner that can run those kind of angle routes out the backfield. I think Rhamondre Stevenson is an absolute smash at his cost right now. So yeah, I really love this suggestion. Are you, if the price is, let's say, I'll give you Rhamondre Stevenson and a second for your first and a third. Is that too expensive for you, or would you still be interested at that price?
I'm still interested in that price. Rhamondre, I just made a video about him actually, and he fit in this category that I called borderline first. I think there are definitely teams out there that I would look at, and if I took over that team right now, I'd be willing to pay my 2025 first round pick for Rhamondre Stevenson straight up. Again, I feel like it's very specific teams, not one of those, oh, well, I just need one more running back and then my team is set kind of thing. It's like I have good running back depth. My other positions are pretty well that, or honestly even have like studs at every single other position. And that first is just kind of hanging out there. And I want Rhamondre out of more, not out of necessity, but just more out of fun and depth. Then I would be willing to do that. But if you're telling me I get a second with Rhamondre and I can still pay it first, I don't really care about the third. Then yeah, I would definitely do that too. That makes it more palatable for me as a contender to go out and buy Rhamondre if I'm also getting a second round pick attached with him for my first.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. I've got him. I'm just looking at my trade values here. I've got him worth exactly a 2025 first. So yeah, that's my price point. If you want access to my trade values, hit the little join button below. You get access to all of my Dynasty trade calculator, trade values, and of course all of Tom's best ball content as well. The final guy we're going to talk about though, Addison, David Montgomery. It feels like he's always been that player that you've rostered, he's done well, but you've never felt great about it. And then last season in Detroit, he finally kind of had a breakout year. Are you expecting him to build off that, potentially be better than he was last year? Or do you think that last year is kind of his ceiling in terms of that back-end RB1, high-end RB2 in that sort of points per game range?
I think last year is his ceiling. So people might already get scared off by the fact that I have said that I don't think that he's going to have a better year than what he had last year. And maybe you're buying at a higher price point than what he might be a year from now, which is probably pretty possible. But you're not buying David Montgomery for the value of what he's going to have a year from now. You're buying David Montgomery as a contender, I would say, for the value that he's going to give you over the next 4 or 5 months, which to me, no, I don't think he's going to score 15 or whatever touchdowns that he had last year. But he's going to score double-digit touchdowns. And he is the best handcuff running back in fantasy football. Not to say that he's just strictly a handcuff, because he's very valuable as a flex play, as an RB2 when Jahmyr Gibbs is healthy. Over the past 9 weeks of the season last year, him and Gibbs were both fully healthy, and Monty outscored Gibbs in 4 out of those 9 games. And the other games that Gibbs outscored Monty in, you look at like the game logs, it was like Gibbs scored 25 and then Monty scored like 16. So that like he was outscored, but that's not to say that Monty had a bad game himself. Like Monty still was putting up RB2 numbers. Gibbs was just putting up like top 5, top 3 numbers. So Monty's still very valuable when Gibbs is healthy, but when Gibbs misses time, which they play the running back position, it's almost a guarantee that every single one of these guys is going to miss at least a game or two. Heaven forbid anything major happens to Jahmyr Gibbs and he misses a massive amount of the season. But if Gibbs were to miss time, David Montgomery's ceiling in this Lions offense is massive when he has the entire backfield to himself. I mean, we saw he had like, I think in the 2 games Gibbs missed last year, he had something like 300 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns in 2 games. Like that's utterly insane what Monty was able to do last year. And like, I think it was like weeks 3 and 4 or 4 and 5 or something like that. It might not have been 300 rushing, but 300 total ish. So he is the best handcuff and still has value whenever his backfield mate is healthy. So for the price that you can get him for, it's a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Those 2 weeks was week 4 and 5, and he scored 55 fantasy points combined in those 2 weeks, which, you know, that's week winning stuff. I think the thing that gets forgotten about David Montgomery, he was so good last year. He was an RB2 in 80% of his games. And in 2 of the 3 weeks where he didn't finish as a top 24 running back, he scored 11.5, 10, and then he had a dud week against Tampa Bay where he scored 2.3 points. And look, the Tampa Bay running defense was phenomenal last year. Like he scored over 10 points in every single one but 1 game last year. Like he has got a really nice, solid, reliable floor. And Tom talks about this all the time on the best ball shows. He has got so much contingent upside, like you laid out. It feels like, how many players can you say his floor is 10 points a week, but he has got a range of outcomes where he could take over this backfield that we know Jared Goff is a quarterback that's not going to be mobile. He's going to check the ball down. It's got the best offensive line in the league. And we know that they like to run the ball in and around the goal line. He was 5th last year in terms of rushing attempts inside the 10-yard line. If he takes over this entire backfield, even for a 1 or 2 week stretch, he's a top 3-4 running back that week, guaranteed. And yeah, there's not many players that have got that league winning potential. And I think that when we talk about upside and potential, it's always nice to chase those sexier kind of shiny toys, isn't it? You know, you talk of upside, you immediately think of a skinny fast player who can score from anywhere. You know, if you asked anyone what running back has got the most upside, you'd say Devon Chan or, you know, Jamal Gibbs, for example. But actually, David Montgomery needs to be in that conversation, not necessarily because of David Montgomery, but because this situation is so good for fantasy value, because we know that there's that rushing upside, the passing potential, and this offensive line situation is so good. So, yeah, I don't love David Montgomery, the player, but I can completely get on board with when I'm paying for a guy. His cost is at his floor, you know, 22 in DLF ADP. I'm paying a second and a third round pick for him. It's everything we said about Rhamondre Stevenson. I'm buying him for his floor value over the next 2 years, but there is absolutely a ceiling outcome where he can win me a league almost single-handedly.
Yep. That's David Montgomery. I mean, and to put a little bit more context into the Tampa Bay week, that was the week that he got hurt. I thought that was in the back of my head. He only played 25% of snaps that game. Granted, Tampa Bay's defense is also phenomenal, so they held him in check for the snaps that he actually played. But that was also the week that he got hurt and he left early. So there's a little bit more context into his one dud week as well.
So he finished 10 points or above in every single game that he played over 50% of the snaps, shall we say. And, you know, that one of those weeks was week 18 against Minnesota, where the Lions already had stuff sewn up and things. So, you know, they weren't exactly going for it massively. But look, I love all four of the players you've suggested. I really enjoyed the conversation we got to have about Jake Ferguson. And yeah, maybe I'll give it some thought over the next few days, whether I'll come around to it. But remind everyone, Addison, thank you ever so much for coming on. Remind everyone where can they find you? Where can they find your fantastic work?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on as well too, Rich. It's phenomenal. Anytime I can talk about just undervalued players, it's really fun. Really, especially undervalued, not sexy, fun players to buy to help you compete this year. It's really, really fun. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at @AmazeHayes_. I'm also on YouTube. I do content for the DLF YouTube channel for Dynasty, and I've also started doing content for 4for4's YouTube channel, strictly for redraft and stuff. So I got my feet in both worlds, so to say.
Well, we're big fans of your work, big fans of Addison. So go and check him out and make sure you stick around because we'll be back very soon as we head into redraft season.